Hey everybody, I'm Adrian Graham. I'm a cloud solutions architect, like the slide says, for Google. I'm based out of LA, and I've been there for about 3.5 years. And I spent about 20 years in visual effects, working at Digital Domain and Double Negative and Technicolor with some of the people in this room here, as a matter of fact. I see some people over there, but my job now is to figure out how to run all those workloads on the cloud. So I work with rendering companies and VFX animation houses, as well as broadcast streaming solutions. And the first thing that I want to talk about, so what I'm going to talk about in this 10 minutes or so is to sort of lay the groundwork for the three speakers that are coming after me, to sort of understand what their motives are and what the benefits are of cloud in general, and then we'll sort of whittle down and talk a little bit more about Ethera. So a little homage to Kubrick there. But there's a few stories that I want to talk about, and there's some interesting ones and some compelling ones. But what's really happening is, I'm going to go off script for a second. I'm going to tell you about a customer of ours that had their deadline shortened from 2 weeks to 72 hours. And this was on a Thursday, and we've probably all experienced that before. I was in direct contact with them as well as the sales team, and we managed to figure out how to distribute their load to anywhere in the world. And at one time, we had about 220,000 cores running, and they managed to hit their delivery date and deliver on time. And that was all with what's called preemptible virtual machines, which are excess capacity. Excess capacity doesn't necessarily exist everywhere at the same time. Different time zones and different workloads will sort of shift around the world. But that's getting a little too into the weeds there. So this is sort of like explaining what's going on behind me, is that the demands are getting more and more, and the resources are getting, or the money that you get is less and less, and there's more and more competition out there. And there's other moving parts to the problem that we're seeing, and that's things like subsidies and the amount of crews that are moving around the world. For example, looking at this sort of backwards chart here, the number of productions in Canada grew, and the number of productions in California shrank. And that's just because the BC and Quebec subsidies are much higher than what California offers. And UK is also a special case as well, and we'll talk about that in a second. But these shows staff massive amounts of people. And how do you accommodate all these people? And these productions will scale up, and then when they're done, according to Hollywood accounting, the corporation goes away, so they scale down to nothing. What do you do with all those resources at the end of it? And that's where cloud comes in. So there's this inherent flexibility to cloud that will meet the demands of your utilization, or whatever you need to throw at it, like that job that needed to be done super quick. We were able to find a bunch of resources and help them find resources and help them get quota and deploy and move their workloads around the world. And we sort of, helped them. We assisted them in delivering that show. Massive amounts of flexibility, and that's totally needed with productions these days. I started in VFX in '98, but I started in the industry in '95. But if you look at something like Titanic with 300 shots, and that was like the most massive VFX film that you could ever imagine, now that's like nothing. And Infinity War has 3,000 of them, done by many, many houses that all need to share data and share assets. And if you've ever had to package up a hard drive and ship it via FedEx to a customer, and you worry the entire time as to what's going to happen to that hard drive, because there's no way you could, your existing networks might not handle the amount of bandwidth required to transfer it over the wire. But what I was mentioning earlier about the UK, and this is interesting, maybe not. I don't know how many people are here from. Is anybody here from Europe, UK, from a studio there? The source from Animation Magazine, 1 in 3 workers in VFX in the UK is not from the UK. And what's going to happen with Brexit? Are they going to have to get visas? Are they going to? What I see happening, my prediction is that these companies will open another location in mainland Europe and move those highly skilled, trained, talented VFX artists back to Europe to work there. So what are they going to do? Are they going to buy a whole new infrastructure and render farm? Are they going to? They're going to spend $500,000 on yet another storage device, and now they're going to have to synchronize between those two on-prem locations. Like, these are really hard problems and really expensive problems to solve. So to speak to that exactly. And there's this refrain that you'll hear around the industry from people like me who aren't necessarily on the box, but we're talking about how to deploy all that, is Capex versus OpEx, right? Capital expense versus operational expense. And I actually remember the days of working with Bob Keski here back in New York, which was like a lifetime ago. And there was no cloud. And we had to make these decisions. How do we fit more render racks in our render farm? How do we acquire more workstations? And oh my God, it's going to take 6 weeks to deliver these workstations because there's a GPU shortage or something. Like, these are real problems that you experience with on-prem. And even to the extent that, do we have enough power to power these in our building in the middle of Manhattan? Like, you don't have these limitations on the cloud. And that's what cloud enables. It, in this sort of very markety slide, ending in delight, it basically helps you through a different pipeline, not a VFX or animation pipeline, but the sort of migration of on-prem to cloud and your sort of the cycle of getting the data in there and working on it and then delivering it and then archiving it. I don't know why store and render are separate, are reversed. So the next 3 slides are the past, present, and future of what an architectural diagram or what a deployment might look like. And this is, the past, and to a certain extent the present, if you haven't migrated yet. But there's all these, you got a massive set of render farm nodes. You've got databases on the back end. You've got users and admins based on domain controller like Active Directory. You've got a massive file server and a license server and a bunch of artist workstations. And all of this, you're paying for electricity and HVAC and networking and maintenance and support contracts and all that. The present is, and a lot of companies have adopted this who have any cloud presence. This allows you to do something called burst rendering. So essentially, you've got your on-prem hardware. You still got everything that's familiar to you, your render farm nodes and your databases and everything. But they all talk to the cloud side. And they all have some sort of synchronization methodology to allow the render workers on the cloud to read the data from on-prem. And whether that's with like a read-through cache, or if you're close enough to a data center, you could actually direct mount your on-prem storage. There's a lot of configurations around this. But this is a very common sort of solved problem. People are doing this today. There's massive amounts of business, of burst render business on the cloud today. And in the media centers, right? So Vancouver, Montreal, London. We have a data center in Sydney. Los Angeles, yes, but a little less and less. So this is the future. And there are a few people that are doing this today. Some of them are here today. But in terms of like a full virtual studio, this is something that's sort of like, we're at the precipice right now. And if you were to start up a new studio tomorrow, there's no reason you should buy $3 million worth of equipment. You should definitely consider deploying on the cloud. So what does that entail? On the on-prem side, you see hardly anything. Like there's just some sort of gateway or some sort of gateway and an entry point, which you can run from a laptop or a workstation or some sort of thin client or a zero client. And yeah, you might have an on-prem domain controller for Active Directory service. You could do that on the cloud. And then you have some sort of enterprise-grade connectivity. On Google, we offer a bunch of different products, but it depends on what city you're in, where you're located, and what kind of requirements you have. And then you've got your virtual workstations. And these are sort of like the kernel of everything, right? Like you can deploy, you could choose how much storage, how much RAM, how much, what kind of disks, how many CPUs, how many GPUs. You're not limited to a single GPU, and what kind of GPUs. And then you could deploy tens, hundreds, or thousands of these. And then to be able to orchestrate the whole thing, you need some sort of connection broker. You need a way to assign users to resources and to be able to manage the resources and say, I don't want this resource to sit idle for a weekend when they go home for the weekend, because you only pay for what you use. And that's the important part. One of the important parts of cloud. And then everything else in the cloud is somewhat familiar. You've got your license servers and your databases and your different storage platforms and your render workers. And the cool thing is that your workstations are literally on the same network as your render workers. So you have, my tagline is that when you're on the cloud, you are the internet. When you see the bandwidth speeds of VM to VM communication or workstation to workstation communication when you're on the cloud in a VPC network, it'll blow you away. Like this is not possible on-prem. But how do you do it? And how do you put all this together? There's a lot of moving parts and there's a lot of different configurations that you need to choose from. And right now we have a pretty rich community of partners to help deliver this type of thing. And Teradici is sort of like the key component because Teradici provides a number of products, but the most important one is their PC over IP protocol, which is the desktop streaming protocol, which is sort of the industry standard, the gold standard in VFX and animation, because it entails things like very high color fidelity, image fidelity, lossless compression, the ability to do 4K or multiple monitors, and Wacom tablets for external input. And they're really, really tight with the media and entertainment community. So I could talk about that further, but what we're here today is to talk about Ethera, because Ethera simplifies all of that and enables you to connect with a single portal. All those moving parts are solved for you. The puzzle pieces are put together for you with Ethera. But where is it? Where is the cloud? And where does it run? And this diagram shows this is sort of Google's life work, right? And when I say Google Cloud Platform, think of Google Cloud. So you've got Google, and then you've got all the Google services like Search and Maps and Gmail and Docs and Drive. And then GCP is kind of like on the same level as that. They're all customers of Google infrastructure. And this is Google infrastructure. So when you're running on GCP, and Ethera runs on GCP, I might add, you are leveraging the security and the power and the flexibility and the efficiency of Google's infrastructure. We actually lease ships to lay cables, our own cables under the ocean. So there's this worldwide fiber network. As soon as you're on Google's network, it's private, encrypted, owned lines anywhere in the world. It's obviously speed of light, it's all fiber optic. And we've very carefully chosen where to lay the data centers out. And the ones in white are the ones that are upcoming. I think there's one happening in Las Vegas soon that was announced recently. But we've put some data centers in what we call our metro centers. So like Los Angeles, Montreal, London, Sydney, Tokyo, those are called our metro data centers. So they're like, usually you build a data center out in the middle of nowhere where power and land is cheap, and we've done that for the most part, but then we have a different strategy for these metro data centers. And those are amazing for ultra low latency. If you choose to put a virtual workstation or an Ethera region in the Los Angeles data center, you'll get like sub 2 millisecond latency, which is, anything less than 10 milliseconds is like an on-prem, is like something under your desk. And that leads us all to the flexibility. And again, you just pay for what you use, but it's totally customizable. You can, if you just look at the Ethera dashboard, you could see even like a simplified set of choices that you can make. If you go into the Google Cloud Platform console, you could literally, there's sliders to say, how many CPUs do I want? How many GPUs? How much RAM? And what kind of storage? And one thing that I wanted to mention here is that with cloud, you're not locked into this capital expenditure, right? If something new comes on the market, some new storage platform comes on the market, you could try that out and you could shift to it. And it's not like you spent $500,000 buying this piece of hardware that now you have to live through the next 3 years to be able to write it off. You could change your strategy. You could deploy anywhere in the world, and you could try different technologies. And it's all pay as you go, and only for what you use, and you could benchmark it all against each other. And that leads us to the final comment, is about security. So I work with the Big Six Hollywood studios, as well as, so there's a company called Independent Security Evaluators, ISE, they're here. They might even have a booth at SIGGRAPH. But they are the main media and entertainment security audit company. And they work with us, so we do quarterly audits with ISE to comply with the MPA standards. And there's this, you've heard of the TPN certification that's coming soon for cloud. It exists on-prem right now. But once that's officially released, I think it's early next year, GCP will be a TPN certified, or you'll be able to TPN certify on GCP. So we're certified for Tier 1 compliance on all the big 6 Hollywood studios, and that means things like Disney and Sony and Universal and Paramount are all sort of in line with our security best practices. So we've laid all this groundwork for you. So the only thing that you're responsible for is following the best practices. Obviously, it's up to you how strong you want to dial up the security profile, but we have published guides around how to secure your workloads and what follows the MPAA best practices. So we have literally hundreds of security professionals that work at Google who are just massively engaged with any number of things like threats and vulnerabilities, and as well as a whole team dedicated just to security compliance. And that's not just M&E, we're talking banks and healthcare and those types of certifications, which are even more complicated than the MPAA. That's all I have today. There's a few links that you could scan. I like to throw these up because it sort of throws people off. But there's a few places you could find me, and you could find things about media at Google. Like I was talking about, Teradici and NVIDIA, very, very close partners of ours. Thanks.